Well, the next,
First and second path exchange. Um, if I haven't met you, my name is Barb Kirkwood. I always forget to do that. And afterwards, I keep thinking, why did I forget that again? We have a lovely spread of goodies back there. If you haven't made a trip back to the table to find out something delectable to eat, you should do that before we get our program underway. Don't mind me. You can talk while I can talk while you're moving about. We'd like to thank Susan and her team that she has brought with her for putting out this lovely spread for us. Just some announcements. We have some people joining us. I think that the Bowers may earn the award for the furthest traveled, well, the furthest away, because they are joining us from down under. And I'm not sure what part of Australia they're in right now, but the last I heard, they were in Alice Springs. There is no Alice, there is no Springs. It's in the middle of Australia, and it's hundreds of miles from anywhere else. During the summer, well, it's hot right now, but during the summer, it's hotter than Hades. And it's an interesting place to go. Couple things coming up. The convention is actually going to be just a few hours down the road from here. It's going to be in the Brandywine Valley of Pennsylvania. I think it's what, about 3 hours, Paul?
Depending, about 4, I think, for us.
4? 3 to 4. Okay. We won't quibble about an hour. So 3 to 4 hours down the road. One of the feature things is Jenkins Arboretum there. And of course, we've had a long relationship with them. They have one of our legacy gardens, and they have a growing Satsuki display. So just going to see that garden alone is worth the trip. It's nice because they are sponsoring this as opposed to one of the chapters. We as a chapter have stood up to help sponsor that because it's a lot to take on with a small group from a garden. They have the Holly Springs Legacy Garden there. And we are going a little bit later this year than we have been when we head south, because we're hoping to catch more of the azaleas in bloom. So it will be the 7th through the 10th of May. The deadline for signing up is coming up. So if you've been thinking about it, go ahead and get signed up now, because the price jumps and the hotel rooms disappear. And when I called to reserve a room for myself, he said, "Oh, gosh, we don't have any rooms." And I said, "But I'm with the Azalea Society." And he says, oh, let me look there. And he surely did find some rooms there. So they are there. We also have our one and only sale coming up this year. And I have, my usual suspects, as I call them, who always come out and help us with the sale. You have to remember that everybody in this group is really a very knowledgeable person, and helping people pick out azaleas is actually one of the fun things that we get to do. I've listened to enough people that I can sound like I'm intelligent about azaleas, and that means anybody here could do that. The date is April 19. We're going to hope that the rain gods are happy with us this year. They were not kind last year, and I think at least they should be kind every other year. The rain date will be the next weekend. Now, this is the Saturday right before Easter, but it should have a lot of traffic there. We have, this is where we have our moneymaker. And, this year we made donations to the Green Springs Title I program, to the ASA General Fund, to Meadowlark Botanical Gardens, and to Kirkwood Presbyterian Church. And we want to be able to continue supporting these organizations. So we do have to make our money at the sale. And Meadowlark also has invited any of our members to come to an azalea or a daffodils 101 talk on Thursday, April 3 at 1 p.m. So if that's something that is interesting to you. Okay. Tentatively. So we are looking at the support for the Klimovitz Garden. What was stalled for a long time has taken up with new leadership there. We have water up there. It failed us last year a little bit because the water levels were so low in the lakes that they were still struggling with getting water to everything. But we're getting ready to expand and put in more Klimovitz azaleas, and then we'll have further talks about what else we might do with that particular garden. So if you're available, I'll be making phone calls probably to try to get people to come up and help us on April 3 tentatively for mulching of the azaleas. Are we going to be, we're going to be doing some planting. Okay. All right. Is Leo going to come and dig holes? Okay, so Carolyn is bringing muscle with her so that us senior folks don't have to do all of the heavy labor of digging in the dirt that has a little bit more rock than we would like to see. But we do need help for planting azaleas, and I think we're mulching them too. Yes, or is that going to be done another day? Okay. All right. Are we planting on the extension side then, or are we just okay? All right. We also have today, we had a donation of some books from the libraries of Bob Hobbs and Jane Kinsey quite a while ago. And we had tried a little bit of a silent auction one year. I think we got, very focused on the plants rather than the auction. And so we have brought just a few of the books. Two of them are out of print. And so if you are interested in having one of these for your library, this is the place to get it. Just, put a bid down. And I think we are about ready for you to give us some information on Dan Cribble and Nucios.
So I talked to Dan Crable this week. Dan's long-term member was president of the chapter. He's been on the national scene as the treasurer for years. Good guy. Year or so ago, had a pretty severe stroke. He came to our garden in the spring last year, but we hadn't heard from him for a while, and I happened to go to a restaurant that we had shared with him once. So I called him up. Well, they're down in Florida. They went down and they have a place to go to. And they were going to stay for a couple of weeks, come back up here for a couple, and then go back down for the worst of the winter. 3 days after he arrived, he had something that put him into the hospital. And basically he was there for weeks and literally has spent the winter down in Florida. He's doing better and should be coming back up north in a week or two. But Dan Crable's had a tough time and just wanted to give you an update on that. Yes, Dan Crable. The other thing is Nucio's nursery. I have finally learned to pronounce it, ma'am. It has been Nucio's for decades for us, and we finally listened and are saying it right. Went through the fire in Altadena and was destroyed. Destroyed all the houses, all their equipment, and for some reason didn't touch the plants. And so it's one of those, I don't know what happened, but just before the fire, Tom Nuccio, who is a very good guy, has climbed the mountains with us I think in North Carolina after one of the conventions. Um, went into the hospital with some type of undiagnosed problem. So he wasn't even around when the fire hit. So Nuccios is probably on their last year before they shut down. We'll be there in a week or so for our daughter's wedding, and she thinks we're coming for the wedding, but we're actually going to go visit. Please don't tell her. She knows. But anyway, that's what we're going to do. They are no longer mailing because all of their ability to ship plants was destroyed. So those are the two. And shall I move on to our speaker? Okay, so this is a great honor for me. I don't think there's anyone in this room who doesn't know Don Hyatt. There's probably not a plantsman in the country who doesn't know Don Hyatt. And as I ran into him in Scotland, and we ran into him in Germany, Don is everywhere. And there's a true story. We're on a tour at the, what's his name? We have his plants. And we're walking down this road, and I think the two of you pop out of the woods, cross over, hi guys, and off into the woods. It's like, what the heck? We're in Scotland. Don, to me, is a special guy. When we joined Potomac Valley back in '79 and then helped form the Northern Virginia chapter, Don was here. Don is the true Renaissance man. There is nothing that Don has not done. He has helped win a supercomputer for the high school. He has climbed all the balds. After the fires up there, he helped reseed the balds. Now, his cohort in crime right behind him has contributed just about everywhere Don is. There's this adult who's keeping Don straight. He can play the piano. He can draw. He's done hybridizing. We have a couple of his plants in our place, and we haven't killed them yet. Don's special. And so this is my chance to say thank you for all the years that you've put up with us and helped us and guided us and just made the world a better place. So with that introduction, Don, and
Thank you. This is going to be an interesting meeting. I had two talks to give. One I did at the Lewis Ginner Botanical Gardens a couple of weeks ago for their winter symposium, and that was on the problems in the Appalachians with our native azalea stands and what might have been wiped out because of the hurricane. And so that took a lot of research. I got that one done, and now I'm working on the next one. And you're going to see the first presentation, my dry run, my first practice. We'll see how it goes. Apologies in advance. Well, the topic is garden art and accents, plus a touch of whimsy. And this is a garden in Portland, Oregon, and it had the Japanese garden outside of Portland, beautiful place. But we'll be looking at lots of gardens in different places, some of our own members, things that they have in their gardens. And that's my garden at one time before it got devastated by the deer. And that was me. And you know, Dave's just said I was a Renaissance man. Well, I have always been interested in art. So I got ready to get out of my garden because I like to draw and paint flowers. My mother and grandfather were both commercial artists. And so I became interested in art early, and I thought that was the career I was going into, but I got into teaching instead, teaching math and computer science. But I do like watercolors, and that's one of my watercolors of the azalea redwing. When I was teaching, the students said, "Don't you want to be a famous artist?" And I said, "Artists are never famous until after they're dead." I'm in no rush, but I'll tell you, I'm getting closer. Well, so there are a couple of azalea prints, redwing and prunifolium. I always admired Anophelia Dowden. I don't know if you're into botanical illustrations, but but she was always just fantastic. And I judge myself against her, and I'm not Anophelia Dowden. I just like when I draw flowers that mean something to me. And so there's my black-eyed Susans and Queen Anne's lace, and the way the growth turns. I look at each one of my pictures and I want to know that's the personality of the plant I grow. There's the dogwood swooping down from an upper branch, Virginia bluebells arching over from the base. But what is art worth? And the Mona Lisa is supposed to be the most valuable painting in the world. Leonardo da Vinci, it's estimated at $850 to $1 billion if the French decided to sell it, but they're not. They're building a whole new wing and they're putting the Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa in there. But there are artists that really do a good job, and they're forgeries. And sometimes you can tell. And what is a forgery worth? It's whatever they can get. Well, I don't know if you've heard some of the controversy recently. There was at Trader Joe's, here's their banana. It's on sale for 23 cents. Organic, I think it's 29 cents. But then there was an artist that duct taped a banana onto a wall and sold it. Had 3 different versions of this and sold it for, 2 of them sold at $120,000 a piece. It was one of them was auctioned again. They did replace it, but it just purchased by Justin Sun, founder of Tron cryptocurrency, for $6.2 million. And he ate the banana right away. Didn't let it rot. But I'm thinking, what's the next craze? It's toilet paper. Just think, remember back to the pandemic? That was one of the most valuable things we had. Well, if you look at Michelangelo, the creation of Adam and the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, and you think, well, it could have done duct tape and a banana, but then it could have also done toilet paper. Well, probably the most valuable sculpture is Michelangelo's Pietà in the Sistine Chapel. It's estimated to be worth between $1 and $10 billion. But a lot of our members have statues and things of religious significance in their own garden. And this is the Cosby Garden. And Roy was a Monsignor. And so there's lots of religious things there, and you appreciate, their garden and then their faith. And there are others that's in Gibbs' garden. And then Bob and Rosa McWhorter have a tribute to their daughter who passed away, and they have Jen's garden. Nice things to do. Barbara and Al Hall had a garden we visited at the 2016 convention, and you see that little guy hanging off the thing, just the fried, you look at that and you just have to smile. It's just, I like things that I look at and make me happy. And then she has other ones who walk around her garden, and all these little figures, you look at the plants, but then you look at these things that bring happiness. And that's what I like to have, art and a little bit of whimsy in the garden. Here's a Gibbs garden. They have a lot of statues around in very different places. Now, when we toured in New Orleans, we went to a sculpture garden near New Orleans, and they had actual figurines that were cast in cement, I guess. And there's some that were bronze in the garden. And this one I thought was very innovative. And if you look at that, you can see the image of a person seated. And then you see how it's arranged. It's just all letters that are forming that. A lot of planning in advance. Thought that was very clever. Of course, being a junior high school teacher for half of my career, I started to look for bad words, and I didn't find one. Now, in San Francisco, we went to a garden, and you know, it's a matter of a person's taste, and I don't want to say anything bad about person, but this is not my taste. If I had that out on my patio, I would say, oh my gosh, why? But they were into this artist, and I have his name somewhere. I was going to look up a lot of these things and give you additional names when I labeled my slides. Didn't get there, folks. But this was another one. Those are mouths, each with cigarettes. It was like an ashtray. And on the hat on the top of his head, you know, that does not bring me pleasure. Now, when I was in Germany, we saw lots of sculptures. This one reminded me, need to do more exercise. That's another one in Germany. And then at the Lewis Skinner Botanical Gardens, they have some statues that are very abstract, and you can just see that that's like two figures that are together, and then the big mass of the Azalea austreinum off behind the bench. That's such a lovely setting. I like that. That's a nice one for me. Now, let's look at some types of things people do. Now, there's a private garden in Pennsylvania I visited. I was going to look up the name, but for right now, we call it Pennsylvania. But they had a very large frog, and frogs seem to be very popular in the garden. And we'll look at some of those. I have a frog on my deck, and this was one with a battery inside. When you pass by it, the thing would croak at you. I thought that would warn me if deer got up on the deck. They did. The frog didn't scare them away. And this is in the Baudry Garden. That frog just has the, don't you feel like that at the end of the week? Oh, I just think that was the best expression. And they had it actually in a little pond outside of the house. And the larger frog would dribble noise in there, and the little frogs on that pedestal. But then I think that it started to leak, and then Gene and Norm filled it in with dirt. So there used to be a little pond there, but you know, I have history. Now in Carol Sergree's garden, this is a frog of hers. I just think that's just a very clever planter. And the color combination of, you know, the oxalis with the frog, really nice combo. And then one of the Beck's frogs is frog climbing. I think Carolyn has taken a number of these pictures, and I was getting ready to put photo by Beck, and I got on some of them, but I'll just try to remember. And the other one was I took of David Lay's garden, his frog, and that's just a pleasant face. And then Brent Heath's frog in the lotus position. I can't do that anymore, folks. And then Carolyn has another frog in her garden. And then she took a photo of a frog in the McWhorter's garden being held up by a little boy. And this is Cam Williams' garden we toured during the convention. And you may not have noticed it. It's a clump of crepe myrtle with a fern. Everything's sort of about the same color, but you just run across these things, and it just adds a whole new dimension to your landscape. Now, this is Brent Heath's garden and his frog, and I feel that way most of the time, folks. Brent also has the musical grouping, frogs with their musical instruments. And then Richard Bradshaw has one that he occasionally brings out and puts on the table just to remind you. And the other one to the side, that was in Germany, Kermit with binoculars. And turtles are also prominent. This is in one of Carolyn's photos of a turtle. I took this one in New Orleans. Nice additions. Turtles, though, don't have as much expression as a frog. You don't see quite as many of those around. And then in the Baudry Garden, they had a little alligator. And you can see maybe the little feet of another little frog. Lots of little things scattered in their garden. Now, this is birds, another popular topic. This is in David Lay's garden years ago. And this was a bird I took somewhere. I could probably find it out, but I was running out of time. I finished this talk 5 minutes before I left for here. So we'll see how well it goes. This is another private garden in Pennsylvania. And that's a very unusual bird. Beware of attack. I could use one of those if we could take out the deer. There's no picture of Bubba in this talk, folks. The McWhorter Garden. Bob and Rosa had this little owl. That's a thing. And you look at the owl, he has menacing eyes. You know, that could maybe scare something away. Carolyn gave me these. I think the one on the right was in Callaway Gardens. I'm not sure where the one on the left was, but she has enough information that if I have time and I give this talk again, all those things will be there. Another Beck photo looks like little birds, maybe quail or something like that. Very cute little animals. And then Blossom McBriar, I don't know if you remember her, she visited the Azalea Convention in Atlanta and fell. She was 99, I think, almost 100, and broke her hip. But I visited her garden and she had a little bird on her deck that had that same expression as the frog. So you do see birds, they have more expression. You see them more often. And the one on the right is one from Richard Bradshaw. Then years ago, there was succulents and the hens and chickens, and they have it planted in a chicken. That I thought was clever. That same garden had succulent shoes. And then we get to the fabulous flamingos. Alyssa Steve lives in the Blacksburg area and has one of the most imaginative and creative gardens. And there's stories around the flamingos. She had all kinds of flamingos. These were just sort of standard and rather pale. These were getting elderly like me, really kind of bad. These were illegal flamingos. And then see all those little potted plants? Do you see the flamingo? Right there, a little scattered, there it is in a pot, little tiny flamingos. And there's a story behind flamingos in the Rhododendron Society. When we were holding conventions here on the East Coast, there were some people like Hank Shannon and a lot of the older members in the society. There was a movie called Pink Flamingos, and it was about a trailer park and some unsavory activities. And so that, that grabbed the people in the Rhododendron Society. So before most conventions, sometime over the night before your garden was being visited, you would get pink flamingos planted in your garden. You'd wake up in the morning on the garden tour and there are pink flamingos. This is in Paul James, and he actually keeps his flamingos there, and he has them well-dressed, genteel Southern flamingos. And then when I was on my way to Big Bloomers, I passed a house outside of Sanford, North Carolina. And the first time I stopped and took pictures, and they had all these pink flamingos. A couple of years later, I went by the same place and they had them all the way up the bank, but I didn't have my camera ready. And I went down this time looking for it when we went down for our annual plant excursion. I did not see it. So somebody must have taken them down. But it was a whole hillside of pink flamingos in the ivy. Now let's look at other beasties. This is the Mendocino Botanical Garden, and they had a little sign, the Gnome Depot. Gnomes and things. One of our older members, Phil Collins, who's passed away, he had invited the ASA to come tour his garden, and he was into gargoyles. And so, warning, protected by gargoyles. And so he had them all over his garden. Interesting garden. Lots of big azaleas too. Now, Dick White, who had a lovely garden up on Cape Cod, he had this beastie in his garden. He also had white tigers, which I was going to put a picture of that in it. I didn't get there today. But there's another private garden with another sort of strange looking person. And then back at Mendocino Botanical Gardens, they had dragons. Now, if you go down to Plant Delights Nursery, Tony Avon, he's got a wonderful sense of humor. And he once had a big image of a person, I called it the Beware of the Attack Gardener. That was outside of his place, all done with the orange cones that they put along the streets. Now let's look at other things like cats. Oops, I didn't. This is the Beaudry Garden. We all admired that cat. It just perfect. Carol wants one. Here's Barbara and Al Hall's cat. Barbara has a lot of cats. And then Beck photo. This was at the Davis Garden on one of the tours. The Lewis Skinner Botanical Garden. They had a little pig. And you see pigs and other animals. This is down at Alyssa Steve's garden. She had a bunny infestation. She also had a fox, a copper fox. Isn't that clever? I'm not sure it did much for the ceramic bunnies. Down in Gibbs Garden, they know that deer do not like foxes. They don't like coyotes. They don't like wolves. And they actually have three-dimensional figures planted around, stashed in the garden to discourage deer if they're in the, they give sort of a second thought. Now in Alyssa Steve's garden, she's into color. And so she took one of her pigs and just painted it bright, bright colors. And it matched her bench and the hibiscus on the bench. Blossom McBriar also was into colorful objects, and this was a monkey used as a planter. And Steve, she had a section with blue bench. There's actually a little blue pig down there, and everything shades of blue, color coordinated. And then a little bear. Carl and I saw this in Germany, the blue sheep. Interesting. And Carolyn arranged a tour for our chapter to go down to see Cole Burrell outside of Charlottesville, and he has a blue garden. And there's Dave and Leslie Nanny taking pictures of his blue tree. And then another tree that's hanging with blue bottles. Is that a wine? Is that bottle blue? Well, he has a lot of them in his garden. He uses wine bottles to outline his flower beds. But there's a place on the way to the Mason-Dixon chapter up in Western Maryland, near Westminster, that sells blue mulch. And it's ground up tires that's been dyed blue. And Cole Burrell should really get together and take his flower beds outlined in blue bottles and cover them with blue mulch. Not my taste, but people do things that interest themselves. That's fine. Now in the Steve's garden, she had others. She had turned to lavender segments. And then Carolyn took pictures of Bushart Gardens that just plain nice wood. They had a lot of these benches up there. I took one myself, a different bench, and you see how nicely it ties in with the orange tulips. This is another photo Carolyn gave me of a bench that's had been carved into an eagle. And that's a lot of detailed carving there. And so now we get to Norm's birds, Norm Beaudry, and that's his granddaughter measuring a big tree that they had taken down and cut it off at 10 feet And then they hired a guy who was going to come out and carve birds into their tree. Well, he erected a scaffolding, then started carving away. And you can see the bird appearing, their incredible artisanship. And so there they are, the birds finally, he painted them, painted the trunk to look like bark. And so there's Norm standing beside his birds. They're big. It's a very impressive sculpture. And then Carolyn went back and got the prize photo with, huh?
We were down in Galveston. They have, because of all the damage through the hurricanes and all that, you know, a lot of trees that were damaged. And they have just streets that are filled with these sculptures. You can take walking tours of all the trees that they have sculptured. So if you're down in Galveston again, you can get streets.
Okay, Joanne, for those of you online, Joanne Neckel was remarking about visiting a place where Galveston after a hurricane and noticing that they had a lot of carved trees in their area. But Carolyn caught the red maple behind with the tie. Look at that. That's just a perfect photo. Just the red touches on the birds tied in with the red maple. Now, Longwood Gardens has had pictures of, other wood carvings, and they had a big one on pollinators. And then there's a bee there, but they had lots of bees. The botanical garden had wood carvings, and this is one of a roach. Not quite bigger than most of us have in our homes, I think. And in Germany, this is in the hobby garden. They take rhododendrons, and when a rhododendron dies, they carve it into something clever. So you look at some of the images. I mean, they had a whole field of these. And that's just a clever use of a rhododendron root system. Now, Alyssa Steve's other critters that she has. Carol, this is for you. She had a snake just on one of the railings. You walk through it and it's, oh. And for me, she had one that had a big spider. I'm deathly afraid of spiders. I hate them. Down in New Orleans, though, they had giant spiders in one of the sculptured gardens. I don't think I want that in my garden. Now, David Lay had dragonflies in his garden. And Beaudry's, they have had a number of bugs, and Carolyn sent me some pictures. This is an interesting little bug on their wall, and a dragonfly. Butterflies. Jean was very, very talented, and so is Lara, who went to RSI, RISI, Rhode Island School of Design. And out in Gloucester, they actually have beehives, all painted. And in Alyssa Steve's garden, she had weevils. Now let's look at Japanese lanterns, because those are quite popular as accents in many, many gardens. This is the Natobe Japanese Garden at the University of British Columbia. That's just such a beautiful position. You see the accent of the Japanese lantern, the cherry tree, petals falling into the water. Very, very pretty and serene positioning. Throughout that northwest, and this is in the Japanese garden that's not far away, they had a number of Japanese lanterns. And that in San Francisco, outside of the Stribing Arbor, outside of the Golden Gate Park, there's a Japanese garden that has many, many Japanese lanterns. Quite effective. They are expensive, though. Japanese lanterns can run quite a bit of money, I think. And the pagodas, all part of the scene, but here's one of Carolyn's photos. I don't know, was that in your garden, Carolyn? And here's more photos. I don't know if you bought these, but looking at that one on the right, it's like $495, and that was 2010 maybe. Been quite a few years ago. I bet they're expensive. And there's the waterfall right out in front of the Carolyn's house. They have another little Japanese lantern and birds. And then in the Beaudry garden, they've got one. And then I took a picture of Carolyn's Japanese lantern with the birds behind, and the Cirrus canadensis variety Don Egolf. I think it's really a hybrid between the West Coast and East Coast. It doesn't drop seeds, so it's not a problem. And here's one that Carolyn took in the Gillenwater garden. Jay Gillenwater is from Charlottesville area. Now, the Chinese garden in Portland, there are other structures, and that's what they call a moon gate. You walk through a moon gate, and little bonsai and other interesting plants around. The moon gate at the Ginter Botanical Garden, quite impressive. And you look at the setting, it's really quite nice. Then here's out on their patio there, and the structure that almost looks like a gazebo. That reminded me of the Lowers gazebo, which was a nice focal point in the back of their garden. And this is the J.C. Ralston Arboretum with a gazebo, and look at that lovely white camellia, just perfect combination. And Wilton in Charlottesville, a lovely gazebo. And this was in Cleveland at one of the gardens we went to, a nice gazebo. And then you begin to think, well, lots of Americans have interest in our local gazebos. That's at Cam Williams. It's a double cedar. Now, arbor is another structure that you see frequently, and this is Richard Bradshaw's arbor where you go into his pool area. Down at Linda and Bill Pinkham's garden, they have arbors in a number of places. Linda and Bill Pinkham, we were all in the same horticulture class in college. They went into the industry. I became a school teacher. I don't regret it. I really have enjoyed my life. If I had been in the nursery industry, I never would have had the chance to travel and take pictures, because you're always taking care of plants until you retire. Now, Ralph Bauer, who's one of our local chapter members and who lives in Germany and has been hiking with us a lot. Well, I had an article, I guess, in the January newsletter about Ralph's garden, but he has an arbor there entering his backyard. And the thing he liked about it, he's trained muscadine grapes over it. And in the fall, the grape foliage turns yellow and his dogwood turns brilliant red. And look, isn't that a pretty combination? But you need something to support the grapes, so the arbor is a good choice. Now, Bushart Garden has arbors in many places. Leonard Bill Pickham, another arbor going toward their central backyard in that main house. And you see lots of interesting things in the planting, stones and things. Oak Hill, Carolyn sent me this picture of, I guess is that wisteria climbing on top of that, but probably very pretty in the spring. It looks like a compound leaf, maybe. Cosby Garden has a small one off of one of the lawn areas. This one I particularly admire at the Striving Arboretum, because you look at that arbor, or whatever, a little more than an arbor, I guess, and the white wisteria. Isn't that a pretty combination? And the Beaudry Garden, there's an arbor that you go through to get into the backyard, and that's got Clematis montana, I think, on that. Looking at it from another direction, you look through to the backyard, and then in the backyard, lots of pots and beautiful plants and maples and whatnot. And then down in the Norfolk Botanical Garden, which some of us are going to visit shortly with the Middle Atlantic chapter, their spring meeting. The azaleas, and then the arbor there crossing over the thing. Now let's look at containers. And Norm has been doing interesting things with using wood beams to form boxes in which to plant rhododendrons. It gives them excellent drainage, and that has a really impressive thing where we're shifting to that. If people are having trouble on heavy soil, you can raise it up with the things and give your rhododendrons a better area to grow. Now, Carolyn, I think you must have purchased this from the Pinkhams. It's a beautiful pot and lamium beside it. Lots of different ceramic pots. The Pinkhams have a lot of pots, believe me. This is Linda Pinkham pointing at some of the pots and things in her garden. Here's a look at it, other directions, more pots. Pots and containers seated among the shrubs in her garden. And Carolyn has a nice ceramic pot at the steps going into her garden. Richard Bradshaw sometimes will take a pot and just cram it with tulip bulbs, put a whole bunch of them in there, and it just makes a stunning display. And then when they're done, tulips don't come back for us, but it makes a great thing to have at the accent in the garden. And Alyssa Steves, this is an interesting pot planted with the top. And then Barbara Hall's garden, this is sort of a snide look on that little thing with, I guess, a succulent, something growing out of the back of it. It looks like a sedum. Alyssa Steves has some other interesting things. Look at the angry pot on the left. Now, Longwood Gardens, I was impressed. I've always admired bogs with pitcher plants, and then little orchids. Don't those look pretty? You can actually have your bog garden in a pot on your deck. Now look at some trough gardens. This is another private garden in Pennsylvania with a frog. This is at the University of British Columbia. They had a lot of trough gardens, things that we typically can't grow. Barbara Hall has a trough gardens with a little basin one. Alyssa Steves is into trough gardens, and we should get together a workshop on making trough gardens. That would be fun to do. You could take something lightweight like styrofoam and cover it over with cement to make a trough. Cole Burrell's trough garden. He had just finished planting that. And this is in Cleveland, another container, not quite a trough garden, but I guess it keeps the voles out of the hostas. She also had an interesting use of sinks and another bathtub. And then in Brent's garden, that's a toilet. And I kept looking at that and thinking, who on earth would want a bright golden yellow toilet in your home? I know why it didn't sell, but he has other toilets. the more standard type. Now, a little sort of aside here, this is when I graduated from college, I was going to start a nursery business. So I looked all over the place on the East Coast trying to find a piece of land to buy. And I eventually ended up buying 78 acres more or less in Amherst County, which is between Charlottesville and Lynchburg. And my property started just over the crest of that hill where you see all the cows on that hill. And so there's my property, the Hyatt farm. And I have bought the farm so far. I paid it off. The first few years, it was like playing Monopoly, going around. You don't get a whole lot of money on a teacher's salary, believe me. So I was using my teaching position to give me an income so I could build my business. But then I got too involved in teaching and I gave up the idea of being a nursery. But I have to tell you a story about when I took my mother down to see the nursery, to see the piece of property I bought. Oh, Mom, I want to show you. She said, okay, well, what kind of facilities are there? I said, well, not a whole lot. There was a little house that did not have any running water. There was an outhouse behind it. And Cam Williams has a delightful outhouse. The one behind mine, you do not want. It's got snakes and bees and spiders. Well, what I did was I decided, well, I'm going to find, men usually don't have problems in the wilderness. We can usually find a tree. But for Mom, I tried to do something. So what I did was I got a chair. I got a blue turquoise toilet seat that I attached to the chair. And then I could stick toilet paper on one of the rungs. So then you could set that my toilet anywhere you wanted. You just dig a hole and then you move it to a convenient spot and you look out at the mountains. They're all just over the crest of the hill, so you're far enough away so people don't see. Well, the only trouble was that was not Mom's favorite, but at the end when she started to wipe, she tilted on the chair. The chair fell over. She had her drawers wrapped around her ankles as she rolled down the mountain. And she was too embarrassed to call for help. She finally did get back, but she says, I'm not going down there again until you get something better. So I looked around in the woods, and then occasionally you find a savior. Well, another interesting thing we've done in our chapter, we brought in Rachel Youngman, who gave a demo on cement castings. And you see, she does leaves and you see mushrooms there. Very interesting. We would love to have her back again, or even have enough to do one of our own demos, because just a workshop, because it usually takes several days to complete. So here's one with mushrooms. And here's Carol's garden, and she's got some little mushrooms there right at the boundary between her patio and her path to her another part of her garden. In Alyssa Steve's garden, she has lots of leaf castings that she's put everywhere. Here's one that's just displaying a bunch of rocks. Here's George McClellan she took leaf castings and put them on rebar and had them in among her plants. Another leaf casting holding shoes. And then she also had viewing stones. These are some stones they found down in the region, and just incredibly interesting stones. And so take a look at a close-up of that. A lot of gardens just admiring nature. You bring it out, set it out to admire. Then you look at that. We're getting rid of pennies, aren't we? So we'll have to do other types of things. Now, on the Pinkham garden, their deck is loaded with all kinds of viewing stones and driftwood things. And then you can look off in the distance. They're right near Suffolk, Virginia. But they have lots of things like bonsai and viewing stones and driftwood and whatnot. And there's in their backyard, they have some viewing stones, and then an alligator or crocodile or whatever. Now, water. Water is so much fun to do in a garden. This is Gibbs Garden in Georgia, and I don't know if you went to the Azalea Convention in Atlanta, but I could have spent the whole day there. This is one of their ponds looking through the trees into the distance. Japanese gardens with birds and water and reflections. Then looking at Monet Garden with have water lilies that will be there in the Monet Bridge in the distance. The Cosby Garden, they have a nice little pond, and there's a waterfall on the other side. And then to the Getty Museum, this I thought was an interesting arrangement. They had a pond, but look at the rocks, how they come through the edge of the pond. It, really a nice effect. Then Sue Perrin, one of the places we visited, her garden in the 2016 convention. And that's a little figurine that she has in her garden. It's called a water baby. That's, huh?
Frog baby. Frog, F-O-G.
F.R. Frog baby? Oh, yeah, because it's holding frogs. Okay. It's an Anna Hyatt Huntington sculpture. And I'll talk a little more at the end about Anna Hyatt Huntington, because my brother who passed away was into genealogy, and he says we were distantly related in the past, but she has a really impressive place where she spent much of her time. Now, Plant the Lights Nursery, we were just down there a week ago. Lots of waterfalls in Tony Abent's place. And then Brett and Becky's Bulb, this is George McClellan's project. He's been building their stream and waterfalls and landscaping. And George, you did a good job. It really is impressive. Looking at the waterfall in the back. And one thing about waterfalls is you want to hear the noise of the water. And so you have to build behind the waterfall, you build an echo chamber. So you make sure the water falls off, but there's a sound barrier and a hole in the back to reflect the noise to make it sound stronger. And so there's very impressive stretch. I was going to put my own waterfall in there, and I did a waterfall in my backyard, but it was a little tiny trickle that fell down off the bank. And the thing is, the raccoons would get in there and tear it up looking for the worms underneath my waterfall. But I do have a picture, and that will go where that other thing is. But now in the McWhorter Garden, they have a little water, and water attracts children all the time. And so there's in the McWhorter Garden, that's a photo that Carolyn took of their little statue, and then the nice little girl with the umbrella. But at the Brooklyn Botanic Gardens, I was watching, George and I went up there to go to a convention on Long Island, and we toured Brooklyn Botanic Gardens. Incredible water features out in front. And to see how it attracts kids. And here's when those streams go off in much higher, right? You can see kids just wanting to get in there. So you have to keep the kids out, but it is a fascination for them. Of course, Longwood has completely redone their water fountains. I think they get up to 90 feet tall or something like that. I didn't get a picture. I was in the wrong part of the garden when it went off. It's, they have them staged. They go on for a while and then something else comes on. Lewis Ginner has a fountain out in front. Norfolk Botanical Gardens has a number of fountains, and this is one that's probably the largest one down there. But then they have one out in front And then they have the one in the lake near the camellia plantings. Makes a nice feature, nice sound in the garden. Down in New Orleans, this was a home that had a lovely fountain. I have to tell you about one of the stories that I was going to put in here as well. When I went to England to see some gardens, I was in one and just admiring the view, and I was trying to take pictures of the things off in the distance, and I backed up with my camera and I fell into a pond up to my neck. And I was able to keep my camera above water, but everything else was drenched, and we were not due back to the hotel until 10 o'clock at night. So the nice people in the garden gave me some jeans from their gardener. They dried out some of my clothes on top of the dishwasher because it was generating heat. And I got back without catching pneumonia. But water features don't have to be enormous. And here's just a garden with just a little one. Nice little thing that was in New Orleans.
I think that's Francis in the middle of that picture.
Oh, yes. It was an azalea convention.
That's Francis Howard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With the cane. And then that looks like Diane Reinke in front of that, and maybe Bob Stillo. Lots of familiar faces. Well, Richard Bradshaw has a nice water feature in his garden. He has quite a large lake behind his home. Has a nice stream rushing down that has plenty of volume. Be sure when you're planting a waterfall that you get enough water to go over it. Don't make it a little skimpy thing. The wall on the right, you see a big camellia, but behind that is a fountain. It just isn't turned on at the moment, but there is a fountain behind that camellia on the right image. And here's sitting beside the lake. Linda and Bill Pinkham have water around their house. This is a pond off of the front of the house. When you go to their house, look at the steps. You have to walk through those steps, on those steps, across the pond to get to the front door. I would fall in, believe me. UPS people better be careful. Now, one of the gardens we toured in Richmond at our convention, Junko Leisfeld, she has a beautiful home and a lovely garden, all Japanese oriented. And you see, has a waterfall coming down one side, and then she has a larger waterfall. And you see the echo chamber behind the waterfall to make the sound stronger. Also, paved surfaces. Look at her driveway. That's a work of art in itself. Just irregular large slabs of stone, smaller cobblestones fit in between. Really impressive. Now, looking at paving, here's another garden in New Orleans. Look at the paving there, all done with rocks in a design. That's interesting. Looking carefully at that. A lot of work, clever organization. Another garden, another paving option. Barbara and Al Hall in their garden, they have just put in a new patio area, and they have a nice little trough garden to contemplate. Richard has a nice little seating area off of his pool area. And the rock wall is very convenient for seating. So make sure you have, when you build something and you're having change, the rock walls could be extra seating. Now here's in Bob and Rosa McWhorter's garden. They have a lovely, large, wide driveway that can be used for all kinds of entertainment features, but they also have it edged with a fairly nice rock wall to sit down on. And there's Rosa sitting beside a plant. In Paul James' garden, he has a nice rock wall along the back of his yard. And it's really nice to have all the little tiny dwarf plants up at eye level. Now let's look at Carol Segree's garden. She used to have a grass area in back around her garden, but the grass was hard to keep alive. So decided that she's going to redo that, and she made a circular patio with stepping stones to get to it. And then she designed a nice fountain area to put in the middle, and then made furniture that matched the curvature of her patio. And there we were celebrating, I guess, our district meeting, her lovely garden at her patio. And there's some of the other rock walls she has throughout her garden, lovely seating areas, so it can handle a lot of people. Now, more fantastic fountains. British Columbia and Lewis Ginner has one. I was going to move that Ginner's fountain to another picture to another area, but such as it is. Here's a rather robust fountain. This was a water garden. Everything got wet. They had umbrellas that when you came in, even their gazebo would shed water. You see the mist falling off of the gazebo out there. Everything had fountains and whatnot. Another interesting small feature is a bamboo rocking fountain. Take bamboo and a little water stream coming in, and it'll fill up and fall over. And this we saw in Germany. They globes in a pond. They fill it with water and turn it upside down, and gives an interesting addition. What they should do is put some fish food up inside the globe, and then you could see the fish come up in there to eat. Wouldn't that be cool? And Bushart Gardens has water features as well. That's a fountain. And then an Alabama water garden. I said, this is one it was on an ASA tour. But I thought that was very creative. Now, options on fences, this one I saw in Cleveland, Ohio. Rather robust gate. Carol just redesigned her gate. And she has a lovely gate to go through, nice fence, new paving, the slate patio, slate entering into the garden. And then you see she's added, there's on the right, you can see the dragonfly on her gate. And then on the other side, you see a wind spinner. And Carolyn gave me that picture of a wind spinner and another one. I don't know if these are in your garden. Do they keep deer away? No, okay. Bridges, if you have water and you got to get across it, this is at Hillwood Gardens, lovely place to go. I think this is maybe back in Bushart Gardens, but I'm not sure. And there's Gibbs Garden with their Monet bridge. And then the Japanese garden outside of San Francisco. I'm not sure I can make it over that bridge. Maymont Gardens, and that was designed by Junko Leisfeld, whose Japanese garden. She was the one who designed Maymont, and they've got a lot of Japanese influence in parts of it. They also have an impressive batch of stairs. Look at those stairs coming down. Makes me kind of weary. The Beaudries have a lovely curving batch of stairs in their backyard. And then the Phipps Garden, I always admired that graceful curve there. And then you look on the right, that's Longwood Gardens. But if you look at the steps, that's water coming down, and it's actually a water feature at Longwood. I don't think people go up those stairs very often. Paul James had lovely stairs, big slabs of rock. Judy Matei, who's outside of San Francisco, outside of Mendocino, has a beautiful garden in amongst the redwoods. And she has some huge rocks in her garden. When I was redoing my garden after damage, when a tree took out my front planting, I put in some steps. But look at similar to another art form is bonsai. And I know, Joe, you've given us talks on that, and the National Arboretum is a place to go, probably the first week in June, if it's open. Does anybody know what the status is at the Arboretum with the cutback on federal employees?
What's the status of the Arboretum with the cutback on employees?
But look at those lovely works of art. And the azaleas, usually around the first week of June is when I find the Satsukis quite nice. And similar to that is Ledoux topiary gardens. It's other plant material that's been pruned. And then, of course, Rhododendron Society, we drink wine. There's me on one of my binges. And this is outside Golden Gate Park. There's a vintage vase that was developed by a designer in France, and he was trying to sell it for he had built it in ceramic and then was going to have it converted to bronze. And he had the commission to have it done in France, and he died before it was done. So they had that thing, probably I think $330,000 was the cost to have that big a bronze sculpture made. An American bought it and put it outside the San Francisco Golden Gate Park. And it's a tribute to Bacchus and also to rhododendron people. Now, there are other secret gardens, Chanticleer. I think that's on the tour for your convention. Wonderful place to go, interesting things. They built a ruin and inside has interesting things. I'm signed up for the convention, are you? Cam Williams' garden, she built a smaller secret garden in her backyard that we toured in 2016. But then you look at some things, and I don't want to criticize, but you begin to say, well, what were they thinking? Embracing the brush pile. Louis Skinner had taken a lot of dead twigs and wrapped them up into a big organized pile. It didn't stay there forever, but I say, why? It's interesting. The Morris Arboretum had one, and I don't know if they made it out of willow or what, but it started to grow all those twigs, and you can see it's developing green leaves and whatnot. I think that is no longer there, is it? Have they taken that down? Then the Garden in the Woods, the New England Wildflower Society. Somebody had a grand idea to wrap up batches of weeds and stick them among the pretty rock garden. And I said, why? And then they took branches and arranged it into a circle. Okay. And then recycling junk. And these are some pictures from several places. I don't know if Bob, did you take these or did Bob and Eve provide those? Bob Harrison provided some. He's into recycling and displaying recycled items. And it can be very effective at times. Big automobile filled with ferns, wagon wheels, and some sort of cart or something that's stuck in the dirt. Judy Matei in Mendocino County, she has this gorgeous garden under redwood trees. But she also has her own section with recycled items among rhododendrons. More recycled items, and a tree with big balls on it. And do you remember, how many of you remember out by Culpeper when you went out 29-211? There used to be a little white house off to the side, and they were displaying hubcaps. And this was a picture probably 40 years ago, but I kept going back and they kept getting taller. They had like 5 or 6 feet tall hubcaps on wooden poles. And when I went back with my camera, they had sold the property and cleared it off just so I didn't get there in time. Then Alyssa Steves has bowling balls. She took bowling balls and arranged them on rebar, and they sway in the wind. Interesting little back corner of her property. And then there was a garden in Arlington, and the people started out with a yellow chain fence, and they originally put tulips lined up underneath it, and then switched to bowling pins. I didn't get a picture, so I had to make that up in Photoshop. So believe me, it existed. There was also a place off of a Price's Fork Road down south that had a whole fence done with rocking horses. Now, places to see that I think are worthwhile. One is Brook Green Gardens in South Carolina. And that's the Anna Hyatt Huntington Sculpture Garden. And she was a noted sculptor, probably the most famous female sculptor in the 1930s or so. And this is one of her most famous statues. It's Diana of the Chase. And the entire garden, it's like 9,000 acres, about comparable to Callaway Gardens in size and other things to see. But they have the most enormous caladium display that's just fantastic in midsummer to fall. And it's just to show off some of the sculptures. That's one of hers, the Reaching Jaguar. Remind me of the frog. That's an Anna Hyatt Huntington piece. And this is walking to another one, and along the way you see Phillies playing. That's one of her sculptures. But the one on the other side is Pegasus, and it's the sculpture garden. It's really a center for sculptors, and they have people, they bring them in to do workshops. And so not all of the sculptures belong to her, but it's a lovely place to visit. So there's fountains and sculptures, fountains and water lilies, and caladiums. Now the Southern Highlands Reserve is down Mount Toxaway, south of the Great Smoky Mountains, near the Georgia border. We toured that, 120 acres on top of a mountain at 4,500 foot elevation. There's a vista from the top looking at the Blue Ridge Mountains, and the place is reserved for people that are studying native plants. It's a sort of a location to come and do research and communicate. They look at those huge rocks. Those were all brought in. And the construction details is they had $65 million, an initial grant, and they took 6 years to develop the infrastructure. So amazing artistry with stone, because you look at the pieces of stone, they moved large boulders from a mountaintop in Georgia to that mountaintop in North Carolina. Major operation. So I did a PowerPoint to show how they did it, because they didn't scar up any of the boulders, didn't just any of the lichens and mosses that were growing on it. What they did was they bored a hole near the center of gravity for a boulder, and the stonemason just incredibly brilliant. So we cut it down, then they put a bar down through that hole so they could lift it from below and not show anything, pick it up, raise it with a crane, put it in place, carefully position plants around the rock, and then hide the hole. They put a stone on top of the hole. And you just don't see any sign. It looks like it's been there for 1,000,000 years. Very impressive. So just a few pictures. Look at those slabs. Some of them were 30 feet long by 8 feet wide and, very thick. And paths throughout the garden, quite impressive, but $65 million can do a lot to your garden. So there's George walking up some of the steps. So wake up, folks. My talk is over. So when in doubt, reach out and try to laugh. Laughing is important. So thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. Any questions? Maymont's in Richmond, center of Richmond. Very impressive. Difficult to park. Don't try to go there on a weekend, I'm sure. Yes. I still own my property. I realize I'm not going to go down. I still own it. I have 2 nieces and a nephew that are they were looking for land to buy, and 3 of them are in the FBI, and their futures are not real clear, and they've been thinking about, well, maybe I'll have to retire early and do something. Well, I'm holding on to that for them because both of my brothers have passed away. I'm the last leaf on the family tree, except for 2 nieces and a nephew. And if they want to move down there, I got a place that's really pretty. And one of the husbands likes to shoot. And I got a lot of deer. Huh?
Huntington,
Oh,
the
Anaheim, that's in South Carolina, near Myrtle Beach. And it's really inexpensive. It's like you get a 5-day pass it used to be like $20. And you can travel all over. They've got transit system inside, wonderful stuff to see. And if you're not gonna go to the beach and have a house on the beach, find something back closer to the town, inexpensive place to stay. So I think it's a nice place to consider a trip in late summer when everything is awful up here, and just make sure you get there before the hurricane takes down all those beautiful live oaks and all that Spanish moss.
You would enjoy Glenstone in Potomac, Maryland.
Beg pardon?
You would enjoy Glenstone in Potomac, Maryland.
Glenstone, Potomac, Maryland.
Several hundreds of acres of sculpture and native plant landscaping with a big gallery inside.
Well, see, I taught school for 32 years or so, and I didn't get out to see much of anything. Teachers usually don't. I was in the summer trying to work on my nursery business, but then when my students were getting involved in science fair projects and trying to win $1 million supercomputer, I was having to run a computer lab in my free time all summer long. So I didn't go anywhere until I retired. And so now that I retired, I'm hobbling around and not getting very far.
The Playhouse family, and his wife created it. It opened 3 or 4 years ago. He drive out River Road.
I didn't. I need a hearing aid too, so